Hi, I'm Todd Pettigrew, and this is a new Christmas ghost story that I've written for 2020, and it's called The Adventure of the Lovesick Lord. The Flu Shot. I have long made a point of getting the flu shot, but this year, with that other thing around, it felt strange. Like getting served apple pie when you were hoping for pumpkin. It's good, but it's not what you're looking for. Still, getting the flu on top of everything else that 2020 had brought seemed like a terrible idea. So here we were in that one tiny pharmacy on King's Road. You know, the one where it's like, how can there be a pharmacy there? I dutifully rolled up my sleeve and tried to appear calm so as not to scare my son, who hates and fears injections, while I merely hate them. There may be some unusual side effects, the pharmacist had said. This year's influenza strains are particularly nasty, and so the shot is especially strong. Myself and the rest of the clan having all been duly jabbed, as they say in merry old England, we went about our errands, and I thought little of the inoculation for the rest of the day. But as night fell and a feeling came over me that I estimated to be at least second-degree wooziness, I remembered what the pharmacist had said about side effects. Wooziness was followed by malaise, which in turn was followed by a high fever and a feeling of sweaty disorientation, which had me in bed early with a growing fear of panic and despair. "Comfort me," I called to my wife. "Counsel me." She did not appear concerned. Perhaps she didn't want to frighten me. "Oh, you'll be fine," she said. "It's just your immune system building up antibodies." Whew, maybe, I thought, but she had had precisely the same shot as I had had, and her immune system seemed to be nothing more than a quiet renovation. Like her T-cells were putting on a new coat of paint in there. My immune wrecking crew, on the other hand, clearly saw this as a major construction project requiring extensive demolition. I tried to calm myself by reading the various late 19th and early 20th century bits of fiction that I keep on my bedside, my covert narcissism being galled by living writers who are more successful than I am, but it did no good. My condition worsened. My wooziness advanced to the 3rd degree or possibly even the 4th. I would have cried out again, but I had lost the ability to form words. The room was spinning. My eyesight was failing. And wordlessly as my good wife casually turned the page of her Margaret Atwood novel, I passed into a consuming darkness. I awoke with a start. Not in my room or any place I knew, not even lying prone. I was standing, fully dressed, in the middle of a loud, bustling, daytime street. People were everywhere, jostling this way and that. Vendors on the street, shouting out the prices of their wares. Horses and carriages rumbling in every direction. One even headed directly towards me. Towards me? Yes, and at great speed. I was still disoriented, and all presence of mind had left me, and I would surely have been crushed under the hooves of a team of Belgian drive horses had not a strong hand grabbed my overcoat and pulled me out of the street. "By heaven, man," said the voice, "you might have been killed." Yes, I stammered. Thank you. What? The man seemed to recognize my voice. "Good Lord, Doctor, is that you?" Yes," I muttered, "for I do have a Ph.D., and I don't often get a chance to make use of the title. I grit my teeth and I smile at every Mr. Pettigrew. I was certainly not going to say no to the title now." "Oh, what a turn of luck," he cried. "I thought you had stayed behind at Baker Street for the paper you were writing for the Journal of Still Ineffective Medicine." "Baker Street? And yet here you are, come to this colonial backwater to aid me in my hour of need." I finally had a chance to get a good look at the man, and while I had never seen him before, I felt as though I not only knew him, but would have recognized him anywhere. The strong brow, the aquiline nose, the piercing acumen of his eye. It was, without a doubt, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He was a younger Holmes, not much more than 30 years old, if that, And if I were Dr. Watson in whatever this was, a fever dream if I were still alive, or some kind of purgatory if I had slipped the surly bonds of mortal life once and for all, it would have to have been in the early days of that famous partnership, when Holmes was still dabbling in medical experiments, and I, Watson, was an army doctor newly returned from campaign in Afghanistan. But where were we precisely? What colonial backwater did Holmes mean? I quickly looked around as a large wagon passed with canvas sides on which were printed Kingsport Fisheries. Kingsport. The name was familiar, though I couldn't quite place how I knew it. But if I have learned anything from my annual encounter with the mysterious and supernatural, whatever arises, one must go with it. So I did. "Ah, yes, Kingsport," I intoned hopefully. "Quite so, a miserable town filled with nothing but vulgar fishmongers and even more vulgar cattle farmers," he said. "I can't fathom why Lord Farrington would have allowed his son to come here in the first place." "Oh, yes, the young Lord Farrington," I said, trying to sound thoughtful, though this name was entirely new to me. "England has the world's best universities," he went on. "Why send him across the Atlantic to this absurd Redmond College?" Redmond College, that name sounded familiar, too. Across the Atlantic. So this was Canada, circa 1885? "And now he's paid the price for his lax paternal instincts," Holmes went on. "For the young lord, as I told you before, has now embroiled himself in scandal and is being blackmailed. An entirely expected outcome." "And it's our job to thwart the blackmailer?" "Of course. But first we must pay a visit to the young lord and ascertain just how much of the blackmailer's claim is true. Sadly, in my experience, the blackmailer's claims are always true. Still, if there is an affair, and if it has not progressed too far, and if we can put an end to it, there may be hope for the Farrington name yet." Holmes charged off through the crowd, leaving me with the last remnants of my disorientation. But one way or another, I reasoned, I had the chance to play Watson to Sherlock Holmes. This was not an opportunity to be missed. I dashed after him, determined to keep up. The game was afoot. When I caught up to Holmes on the busy sidewalk, he seemed deep in thought about the Farrington case, but he still had enough reserve brain power to amuse himself by deducing the professions of the men he passed, though he saw them only for a few seconds. "Undertaker," he mumbled. "You can smell the formaldehyde. Ink-stained hands and a poorly made suit means accounting clerk. Musician, judging by the calluses on his fingers." Eventually we arrived at the stately gates of Redmond and passed through, finding the men's residence in short order, and after a brief consultation with the turnkey, we found the room we were looking for. "You are the Viscount Reginald Farrington, are you not?" said Holmes gallantly, as that young man welcomed us into his small but richly furnished apartment. "Oh, please," he replied in a reedy voice that belied his fine title. "Reggie is fine. I don't like people to make a fuss. Acorn, some tea, please." A finely dressed man appeared silently out of nowhere with a tray and placed it on the table around which we sat in wide leather chairs. "Acorn is a wonder," said the young Lord Farrington, dropping lumps of sugar into his tea. "He was our under-butler back in Somerset. My father simply would not allow me to leave the country without a valet, and Acorn was due a promotion, and so here he is. Annie simply despises him, though, so I make him stay here when I pay her a call. Well, it's not him exactly that she despises, but my having him, don't you see? She's such a lovely, simple girl. She can't imagine not doing anything for herself, don't you see? When we are married, I simply don't know what I'll do." It was not my place to say, but if Lord Farrington and son were being blackmailed by a nefarious criminal, you wouldn't know it by listening to Reggie. He seemed as cool as the cucumber sandwiches I was now enjoying. Acorn was a wonder indeed. Holmes had no interest in the sandwiches or the tea. "Lord Farrington." "Reggie, Lord Farrington," Holmes insisted. "Am I right in thinking that this Annie girl is part of the plot against you and your family?" "Watch what you say, Mr. Holmes," said Reggie, putting an emphasis on the Mr. that seemed to imply that he suddenly saw Sherlock as less his guest and more an impudent footman. "Annie is many things, but she is no plotter. She's an innocent girl, and as for blackmail, there simply is none." Holmes leaned back, closed his eyes, and put his fingers together. He heaved a sigh that told me he was doing everything in his power to be respectful to a man he saw as an overprivileged ignoramus. "Lord Farrington," he said at last, "your father has shown me the letters he has received from the criminal. I have analyzed them myself. The script is fine but firm, and the wording is carefully crafted, all suggesting a man of high intellect and steely resolution. The paper and ink are of the highest quality, showing that he is a man of means. So why blackmail, then? Not to enrich himself, but rather to destroy your family's reputation. Don't you see, my lord, this man, whoever he is hoping you will scorn his threats, refuse to pay, and be disgraced." "But, Mr. Holmes, what you don't see is that the whole thing is simply impossible. A blackmailer is one who threatens to expose humiliating secrets. In this case, that I, the son of a wealthy earl, have been caught in some sordid tryst with a Nova Scotia farm girl. But, you see, it's not a tryst, and it's not sordid. I'm in love with Annie, and I do not desire to keep it a secret. I can't wait for the world to know about my little milkmaid. As for disgrace, I see none at all. She's a delightful girl, salt of the earth, and smart, too, getting her B.A., you know. That's rare for a girl, don't you see? Everyone who meets her is charmed by her, and if I have to bring her to every ball in England, and introduce her to every duke and baroness, and show them all what a jewel I've plucked from the far side of the Atlantic, then I bloody well will. Besides, before long she'll be the Lady Farrington, and I will defy anyone in Britain to tell me she's not." I had to admit that I had misjudged Reggie. If he had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he had also come into this world with a sword of Damascus steel at his hip. He was a proud man who knew what he wanted, and I felt certain that he could and would make good on his threat to bring home his common Canadian bride and damn the torpedoes, assuming someone had invented torpedoes by now. "If you don't believe me," Reggie went on, "go and see for yourself. She lives in a house not far from here. She and some other female students have rented it from two old biddies who are off on some sort of European tour." "My lord, of course you are right," smiled Sherlock Holmes. "We will go and see Annie at once." "If this girl is really as earthy and practical as he says," Holmes confided in me as we passed out of the Redmond gates, "perhaps she will see reason where he will not." Following directions provided by Acorn, we soon came upon a charming little house nestled beside a quaint grove of pine trees. Robins flitted from branch to branch as we made our way inside and inquired after someone called Annie. When she came down the stairs, slim in a modest but fetching dark green dress, I confess I was astonished by recognition once again, as I had been with Sherlock Holmes. The long red hair, the guileless, lightly freckled face, the intelligent gray eyes, I knew her in an instant, though Holmes did not. He made a bow and introduced himself as Mr. Sherlock Holmes, come on behalf of the Lord Farringtons, Senior and Junior. "And you are Miss—" "Shirley," she replied. "Anne Shirley." "Indeed, Miss Shirley," said Sherlock Holmes. "You are his lordship's red-headed farm girl of whom the transatlantic telegraph cables are fairly buzzing." Anne Shirley crossed her arms, a delicate thumb touching her face as she sized up Sherlock Holmes. Whatever manner of man she was used to confronting, it was not this, and her mind, it was clear, was at work. "The people who raised me," she rejoined at last, "taught me better manners than yours, Mr. Holmes. A true English gentleman, I should have thought, would never be so bold with a lady he had just met. However," she said, "I will not answer discourtesy with rudeness. Won't you gentlemen please have a seat? We did sit in the house's little parlor. The furniture was well cared for, but even I, out of time as I was, could tell that it was old. It must have belonged to the elderly ladies that Reggie had mentioned. "Forgive me," said Holmes. "I did not suppose that orphan girls, raised on Nova Scotia farms, stood on such pleasantries." "Green Gables," she informed him. "What is Green Gables?" "The farm of which you speak so slightingly, that's its name." "Because the farmhouse is gabled?" "Yes." "And the gables are painted green?" "Obviously." "And what about the rest of the house? It is all green, or just the gables?" "My dear Holmes," I interjected, for frankly I thought it rather shameful the way he was mocking her. But Anne Shirley seemed to enjoy standing up to his teasing. "And it is not in Nova Scotia, as it happens." "Well, it doesn't matter," said Holmes. "I beg your pardon," returned Anne, "but it matters a great deal to me." "Fine, so it is in New Brunswick, then." "P.E. Island! What the hell is P.E. Island?" "My friends," I interpolated again, "is this any way for civilized people to behave? Why, these porcelain dogs by the fireplace have more decency than either of you. At least they are capable of holding their tongues when they have nothing decent to say." Both of them sat in silence for a moment before Anne spoke again. "How did you know I was an orphan?" she inquired at last. "Did Reggie tell you? I wish he hadn't. His kind think little enough of me as it is." "He said nothing of the sort. You told me." "I did no such thing. My dear Miss Shirley," returned the detective, "you said the people who raised you taught you manners. Anyone but an orphan would have said her parents taught her manners." "Very clever, Mr. Holmes. Apparently Lord Farrington's bloodhound has managed to sniff out one thing about me." "I have deduced 17 things about you since I entered this house," Holmes replied sharply. "You love literature, particularly Milton and Shakespeare. You worry you don't have enough money to finish your studies, and you are hoping to win a scholarship. You wish you had been called Cordelia. You are exceedingly sensitive about your red hair, and I dare say in your youth you were punished for striking some poor boy who presumed to make fun of it. For all that, you take comfort in the shape of your nose. Shall I continue, Miss Shirley, or do you need more evidence that I know you better than you think, and I know the trouble Reggie is in better than you possibly could be aware?" For the first time since we had met her, Miss Shirley, like so many who came under the gaze of Holmes's finely ground lens, seemed at a loss. "How could you possibly know all that?" she wondered aloud. Holmes smiled, now having established the upper hand. "It is laid out before me as plainly as those ludicrous dogs," he replied. "As for literature, there are well-used copies of several major works on the end tables of this very room, and there are more on the hall table. And while the books themselves have had much employment, the covers are clearly new. So, you bought these volumes recently and have been poring over them all hours, eager to excel in your English studies. That, together with your upbringing at dreary Dormers, implies a student eager to win scholarships. No doubt the people who raised you scraped together what little they had for your first year, and you cannot bear to impose on them for any more, even if they had it to give, which I doubt many of your rural P.E. Islanders do. As for Cordelia, one of your books on this table is King Lear, and there is a noticeable and excessive deformation of the binding in what is obviously the first act. I deduce, therefore, that you've turned again and again to the scene where Cordelia confronts her misguided father with her complex love for him. That you wished it was your name was a guess, I confess, but with an appellation as plain as Anne, it was a guess not without merit for an imaginative girl like you. As for your hair, a look of anger passed over your face when I mentioned it, no doubt due to recollection of the taunts of cruel schoolboys who prey on any insecurity and difference. You control that anger now as a young lady with pretensions of refinement, but an orphan girl in a strange new school would have had much less self-restraint. So some boy's head collided with the business end of your geometry book or your slate at some point. It is a mathematical certainty. A moment after I mentioned your hair, you touched your nose in a way that is suggested by long habit, because no doubt you see that feature as a redeeming beauty. which, if I may be so bold, I should say it is. My friends, I have seen many strange and wondrous things in my life, but the spectacle of Sherlock Holmes hitting on Anne of Green Gables was one I had neither expected nor desired to witness. I was glad when the conversation moved on to other things. It appeared that Holmes' bravura display of his razor-sharp intellect had cowed Miss Shirley, for she seemed to come around quite readily to Holmes's way of thinking once we finally came to the topic that we had come to discuss. She was convinced that whatever their feelings for one another, she and Reginald were indeed an unsuitable match. Moreover, Holmes argued that if she truly loved Reggie, she should let him go, for in the end she would always be a burden to him, something he would always have to fight for, always have to explain. It might be a point of pride for him now, but it would not be so forever. And Miss Shirley, a tear in her eye, admitted that such an arrangement was not what she wanted either for him or for herself. And so, at Holmes' request, she wrote a loving but firm letter to Reggie, breaking off the romantic liaison once and for all. It was supremely painful, she wrote, but it must be done for the good of everyone. Holmes promised to deliver it personally, and Anne promised to maintain, should anyone ask, that her relationship with the young Lord Farrington was never anything but that of well-chaperoned school chums. We said our goodbyes, and we were making our way through the pine grove back into the street when Holmes chastised me for having forgotten my hat. I was not used to wearing hats, and I didn't even like the hard bowler that I had somehow been saddled with, but Holmes said he would be damned before he was seen in public with a hatless associate, so I sheepishly made my way back into the parlor to retrieve it. There I found Miss Shirley still present, crying gently, but no, not crying, laughing gently, chuckling to herself, as if at a wonderful joke she couldn't forget. Miss Shirley, I said, my hat. Oh, doctor, I was just, oh, well, I guess it doesn't matter now. She smiled broadly and knowingly. I want to thank you and Mr. Holmes for making your call today. Now, I was no Sherlock Holmes, but I was no idiot either, and I could see that this Anne Shirley was not the teary naïve that we had seen penning a devastating farewell moments earlier. Either she was putting on a convincing act of not having a broken heart now, or she had been giving an equally compelling performance earlier, and I thought I knew which one was fake. Miss Shirley, I cried, you never did love Reggie, did you? Love? No. He's a very sweet boy, and he clearly adores me, but it could never work between us. Because of the class difference. Oh, no, she said, because he's dumb as a post. Miss Shirley, oh, I know he can be eloquent at times. That's what drew me to him at first. He reads Shakespeare so beautifully, but he can't understand the simplest things in real life. I told him when we met that my name was Anne with an E, and he called me Annie from then on, telling people that I insisted on it and wouldn't be called anything else. The truth is, Doctor, I have been looking for a way to end things with him for some time, but I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. He's sensitive, you see, and it would have broken his heart to think he wasn't good enough for a common girl like me. It would have ruined his confidence forever, and a man who is destined to be an earl must have confidence in himself. So, in a way, I offered, this blackmail business was a bit of luck for you. This way he believes that you always loved him, but were forced out of his life against your will. Yes, she replied, it is better this way. It will still be hard for him, but he will be able to bear it, though he's certain to return to old Blighty now, to avoid running into me. He'll go up to Oxford and be at his ease in no time. In the long run, it will make him even stronger. But what of the blackmailer? Oh, there is no danger from the blackmailer, she replied. How can you be sure? Because, she answered with a mischievous twinkle in what now seemed like her green eyes. I am the blackmailer. You? Yes, and I can assure you that the elder Lord Farrington will never hear another word about his son's scandalous affair with Danielle of Dreary Dormers. But Holmes saw the letters himself. He's an expert at such things. He would have known if a woman had written them. True, and I anticipated that Lord Farrington might hire such a man as Mr. Holmes, capable of analysis of all kinds, which is why I found someone to write the letters for me. A strong, educated man with ample discretion and access to plenty of fancy writing paper. Acorn. Yes, he's really quite a darling if you take the time to get to know him. He hates living away from England, you see. Apparently, valet is not a step up from under-butler, at least not to him. You know, it's funny. Reggie always speaks so highly of him, but he never says a single word to him. That's another reason I can't be with Reggie. He's such a terrible snob. Oh, but I would have loved to have lived in a castle. His family has a castle, you know. A real castle in Somerset. Does that make me a hypocrite, Doctor? Not at all, I said. I, too, find myself wishing for that which I would never accept were it actually offered to me. Then you are a kindred spirit, Doctor. Perhaps one day I will find a kind doctor of my own. Goodbye, Miss Shirley. You can't imagine what a pleasure it's been to meet you. And with that, I put on my hat. And suddenly Anne, Sherlock, and Kingsport disappeared all at once, and I was back in the little pharmacy where the pharmacist had just pulled the needle from my arm. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I told you this shot is strong." "It certainly is," I muttered, rolling down my sleeve and getting rather unsteadily to my feet. "Was the vaccination painful?" my wife asked, as I left the back office, rubbing my arm. "A little," I said, "but you know how it is. Sometimes we must accept the pain for the good of everyone."